Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. And I do hope you're having a fabulous weekend. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and a thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, when my grandfather told me this story, at first I thought he was pulling my leg. It couldn't be true, could it? But he assured me it most certainly was. My grandfather Clayton was never a man who suffered fools gladly. He was a man of great integrity, and so why would he make a story like this up, if he told me it was true? Me and my brother Caleb were staying at my grandfather's farm, not far from the town of Blue Ridge in Georgia. All the while my parents went to Hawaii for a romantic week away. And on this excursion, much to our bitter, grievous disappointment, we were not invited. Me and my brother had stamped our feet indignantly, cried out that it wasn't fair. We also wanted to go to Hawaii. Why couldn't we go? My father beckoned for us to go into his study. He closed the door behind him, indicating for us to take a seat on one of his leather swivel chairs that you could twist around like a merry-go-round. Those chairs were super cool. My father's office was impressive. It gave off the I'm important, take me seriously kind of ambience. There was a large mahogany desk lined with green leather trim, and a huge imposing statue of an African elephant on his desk. I often asked him what the green stone elephant actually represented. He told me, "An elephant never forgets, and when you're a surgeon like I am, operating on someone you cannot afford to forget anything. Elephants can also hear infrasound. They sense things we cannot see. As a surgeon, I want to see what is not in plain sight, like an elephant can." That made perfect sense to me. It's always the things you don't see that put a spanner in the works and cause the fortuitous complications you never expected to arise, usually at the most inconvenient, inopportune times. My father believed in his line of work. You had to be prepared for anything, as you never knew what problem would ultimately arise. You always had to make a backup plan to overcome it, like a plumber, quickly finding a stopgap solution to fix a leaking pipe. My father was a prominent heart and vascular surgeon at the hospital, working sometimes long hours. He'd come back home, shattered and drained, and often spend the weekend playing golf as a form of relaxation therapy. His aim was so good with that ball. He was forever getting the quintessential hole-in-one. My mother would say it was because of his surgeon's hands. Even though my father's job exhausted him, he was passionate about what he did, which meant his job gave him fulfillment and satisfaction. My mother was a long-suffering, very patient woman who gave up her career as a midwife to take care of us indefinitely. She had strong, very firm opinions on child-rearing and emphatically believed that one parent needed to stay at home to raise the children, if at all possible. It's got nothing to do with sexist discrimination and all this woman's lib nonsense that they keep banging on and on about, which is designed to create war and conflict between the two sexes, she had said. I don't care about all the insignificant prattle. It's what's best for my children that matters. I don't want them to grow up having a better relationship with their babysitter or au pair than with me. She told us that she'd attended a funeral once, where the mother of two boys had been killed in a car accident. The two bemused boys stood around their mother's grave, almost looking apathetic, indifferent, and very disinterested. My mother was appalled that these kids did not shed a single tear for their mother, as if they weren't even remotely affected by their loved one's passing. In her bewilderment and curiosity, my mother went up to one of the young boys, giving him a warm, affectionate hug. "I'm so sorry your mother's passed away. It must be so difficult for you. I am very, very sorry for your loss." He looked at my mother blankly and said, "I never really knew her. We were raised by our nanny. She's like a stranger to us." I was to learn that the children's nanny died a few years later, and when my mother arrived at the nanny's funeral, those same boys were in absolute bits, sobbing their hearts out. You see, the nanny had been like a mother to them, but their mother had been so far removed, so uninvolved in their lives, For them it was like she didn't really exist. "I never wanted it to be like that for my kids," my mother would say. "If my kids don't cry at my funeral, then I failed exponentially as a mother." So back to the nice little cosy chat with my father, which I was exceedingly worried would turn into a lecture. He looked at us judiciously through his rounded spectacles. His steely eyes focused on us. We immediately stopped swivelling around in his luxurious leather chairs and stared directly at him, not daring to twitch or fiddle. My father managed to demand respect from us, without even raising his voice at us. "Now, I'm not terribly pleased with the way the two of you have been behaving. I don't want you to make your mother feel bad, because we're going to Hawaii together without you. She's feeling guilty about not bringing you along. Your constant begging to come along with us is not making it easy for me. Now it's got to stop. You must try and understand that sometimes Mummy and Daddies need to have a break together, need to get away even from their own children. Your Mummy works very hard looking after the two of you. Being a mother is a full-time job, and I work exceedingly hard at the hospital. There will be many beach holidays for us in the future as a family, and we will certainly take you to Hawaii in due course. But right now, your Mummy and Daddy need to spend some quality time together. Don't you think that's fair?" Of course we didn't, but we nodded our heads in agreement, as that seemed like the right thing to do at the moment. When we were to learn we would be staying at our grandparents' place in Georgia, we were tickled pink. Our frustration about not going to Hawaii whittled away like the vaporous steam from a kettle. Our grandfather Clayton was the most exciting man we'd ever met. He was also the greatest storyteller in the entire world. He'd tell us about ancient sea legends where the ghosts of shipwrecked sailors came out of the mist to retrieve their lost treasure. He told us about the sightings of real ghost ships and stories related to them. We knew time spent with our grandparents would be fun indeed. Being with our gramps ensured we would go out on rides in the countryside, usually on ATVs, bicycles or horses. We'd go fishing, hunting and exploring. It would be an adventure of note. My grandparents lived 4.5 hours away from our home in Atlanta, whose most notable resident is Elton John, who I've seen around rather frequently. He's very distinctive and hard to miss. I've seen him wearing all kinds of wacko styles of sunglasses, including lenses that are heart-shaped, sometimes set with diamonds. He wears earrings in one ear and has an amazing vibrant selection of velvety paisley jackets. Some so loud and in your face, it's hard not to notice him, as he's like a splash of bright colour on a canvas that you simply can't miss. My parents' house in Buckhead is 4.5 hours' drive from Blue Ridge. When the pre-ordered taxi arrived at our large home to pick us up and drive us to our grandparents' farmhouse, I could feel the excited flutters in my heart. We'd never been away without our grandparents before. It suddenly made me feel terribly grown up. I could see my brother was feeling much the same as I was. Although he hid his feelings well, he was good like that. He always tried to maintain that stiff upper lip, composed, indifferent look on his face. But he didn't fool me for a second. "Bye-bye, sweethearts," my mother had said. "I want you to be very good for your grandparents. Make sure you're on your very best behaviour, and don't break your grandmother's china." My mother had wiped away tears from her eyes, as even being away from us for a week was a big deal for her. But we knew she was looking forward to her holiday in Hawaii, spent with my father. I was sure both my parents were going to have a great time, but I had a sneaky suspicion that a week spent with our grandfather would be way better than a holiday in Hawaii. Hawaii might have many things about it, but not a storyteller like my Gramps, and that was a fact. Me and my brother sat in the back of the taxi, watching the moving views outside the window. Our taxi driver was a friendly, gregarious man called Mr. Gupta, who was from the Punjab state of India. He was Sikh and wore an orange turban on his head that brought out his dark olive complexion. His shrewd, very discerning brown eyes reminded me of a bird of prey, and he boasted a long, very full, dark beard. "Why do you dress so funny, Mr. Gupta?" I asked him, as shyness was never one of my greatest virtues. My brother was the reticent one, who looked visibly appalled that I'd asked such an intrusive question. He whispered, "Don't be so rude, Oliver. You can't ask him that." The taxi driver did not seem to mind. He let out a laugh. "You think I dress funny?" "Well, I don't know anyone who wears bright orange turbans on their head. I see country folk wearing bandanas at times, but a turban, well, that's seriously weird, isn't it? Turban comes from the storybooks like Aladdin and the magic lamp." "Well, then you haven't been very observant, have you, young man? There are lots of us around wearing turbans. I'm from Punjab region of India. We dress like this as part of our culture. The orange turban I wear is symbolic, representing courage, knowledge, sacrifice, strength, which is why we often wear orange paired with blue." "But why do you wear dresses? Only women wear dresses." My brother gives me a sharp poke in the chest, his eyes rolling at the back of the head, as if to say, "Now you've done it." "I wear an ordinary pair of cotton trousers covered by overhanging coat. It's our cultural dress. It's very cool and comfortable in hot weather. In truth, I could not imagine wearing restrictive clothes like you Americans wear. Believe me, what I wear is very comfortable. I think equivalent for you to wear hospital scrubs or even pajamas. That is how comfortable our clothes are. I know of Westerners who come to live in Punjab region, return to America, refusing to wear anything else but our traditional clothes in summer. Not cause of culture, but comfort. It's hard to wear jeans once you've tried wearing our cotton pants." He pauses for a moment. "So tell me, what are your names?" "I'm Oliver, and this is my brother Caleb." "And how old are you, Oliver? Which one of you is the oldest? You both are the same height. It's difficult to tell who is the oldest." "I'm the oldest. Caleb is my younger brother. I'm 11. Caleb is 10. "You could have fooled me. The two of you are like peas in pod. If I hadn't known better, I might have said that you were non-identical twins." Caleb looked appalled at this revelation, as the very idea of looking remotely like me did not digest well for him at all. He always thought I was an utter and total embarrassment, with the off-the-cuff random statements I would sometimes make. I once asked the neighbour why her hair had turned a funny shade of blue, when my brother later informed me she had chosen her hair to look like that. Probably paid good money for it too. I insisted her hair looked like it had run in the wash, like when you put a white sock in with your blue denims. "Why are you so silly?" my brother would tell me. "You hurt the poor lady's feelings. You should watch what you say, Oliver. Pastor Montgomery said last week our words can be like dangerous weapons. You are like a loaded gun, Oliver, taking pot shots at everyone with your insulting remarks." "That's not true," I blurted. "I never meant to cause offence." "Maybe not, but why don't you think before you talk? You can't always take back what you've said." Caleb might have been my younger brother, but he was astute and very sensitive to people's feelings. My mother always believed he was an empath. My brother would always be watchful of his words, guarding them with a shrewd assertiveness. But he was right. I could say some rather rude things, but I never meant to cause offence. So often what I said was taken the wrong way. I once asked a woman with a big belly how many months pregnant she was. She was mortified because she wasn't pregnant. I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. My words were like bubbles bursting out of a bottle of champagne, hard to rein in at times. That woman hated me after I made that comment. I wished with all my heart I could take it back, but it was too late. "No, I'm not pregnant," she said, glaring at me through her furious brown eyes. "Are you insinuating I'm fat or something?" I didn't have an answer for that, but I shrank away feeling as if someone had slapped me on the face with a cold block of ice. "Mr. Gupta, I think it's important you know that I'm not like my brother Oliver at all, Caleb piped vehemently. We're very, very different. My brother may be my height, but we're not alike in any way. So, you pride yourself in your individuality, young man. I'm impressed. When I was your age, I wanted to be like my older brother. I look up to him so much. But I see you like to stand up on your own merit. Very good for you, young man. I don't look up to Oliver, because half the time he doesn't think, said my brother. I always think, Mr. Gupta. Mr. Gupta appeared to find us rather amusing. He kept telling us how delightful we were. It wasn't long until we got to my grandfather's farm. I must have counted about 20. Not long yet, from the taxi driver, so not long yet meant we still had a way to go. The journey did go surprisingly fast. We had left at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we arrived at about 1:45, or somewhere thereabouts, in time for lunch. My grandparents were delighted to see us, and my grandfather took our luggage up to the top floor, where me and my brother were to share a bedroom together. The large arched windows with ornate gingerbread trim overlooked prepossessing views of the countryside, and the distant silhouettes of the blue mountains plunged up into the skyline with a sculptural majesty, under a shimmering cloud of white mist. It was autumn, so the trees were richly ablaze with dreamy coats of golds, oranges and reds. We could see the neighbours' horses grazing on my grandfather's fields, frolicking happily in the grass. My grandfather allows the farmer to use his grazing pastures for his horses, and in exchange we were welcome to saddle up their horses, taking them for a ride, provided, of course, we made arrangements with the farmer to pick up their saddles and reins. My grandmother was clucking around us like an affectionate old mother hen, feeding us up with her never-ending supply of apple crumb cake, along with cold glasses of her homemade lemonade, the illustrious recipe she claimed to have got from an old English recipe book by a woman called Mrs. Beeton. It was on the first evening staying at my grandparents' house that my grandfather told us the story. It's a story I have never been able to forget, and I do not doubt for a single moment it is true, as my grandfather was never inclined to make things up. We begged our grandfather to tell us a story, as we sat around the fire pit on tree stumps for chairs, roasting marshmallows and making ourselves s'mores, which are graham crackers with marshmallows and melted chocolate. They're very yummy, but exceedingly addictive. That would be an understatement. Go on then, Clayton. The children are gagging for a story, my grandmother had said with a big mischievous glint in her green eyes. No one tells them quite like you do, Clayton. So go on, give them a story before bed. We would have settled for a story over a movie or a television programme any day of the week, as my grandfather used to say, "There ain't nothing in this world like a good old story. My father said it, and so did my grandfather before him. And there is no way a television programme can come close to a good old story, especially one being told by a crackling fire. You mark my words, it's like comparing polyester to cotton. There ain't any comparison." Me and my brother wholeheartedly agreed. My grandfather reached for his pipe. He lit up the tobacco and then began to puff out long ribbons of white smoke. "Ah, that's more like it, isn't it?" he said with a satisfied air of contentment on his face. His shoulders visibly relaxed. "I need to get into the mood before I tell you one of my stories." I do remember it was an arrestingly beautiful night, with a magical resonance to it. You could hear the crickets and frogs trilling happily to their tuneful choruses. Then there were the hoots from owls and the mysterious distant howls that would leave you saying, "What is that?" My grandfather would say it was the coyotes. The night air was not cold, but ever so slightly fresh, with a cool breeze whipping across the meadows, causing the trees to rustle, while some of the autumn leaves took flight in the air, looking like floating butterflies. The full moon had audaciously parked itself in the sky for the night. She was smiling down upon us, as if she too wanted to tune in to listen to one of my grandfather's stories. She magnanimously showered everything with a shimmering silvery glaze, so the tenebrous night became more pewter in colour. You could make out the ambiguous silhouettes of the trees and the farm buildings, but all the definitive details to these solid forms were completely lost. We were sitting a little way away from the farmhouse, under the open canopy of the starlit firmament. The fire pit itself had been fastidiously prepared by my grandfather. It was situated on the edge of a sprawling flowering meadow that was fringed by a plethora of tall red maple and oak trees, whose resplendent colours were completely devoured by the darkness. The roaring flames of the fire pit, that had been framed by several large rocks in a rounded circle, were spiritedly dancing over the dry wood, and frenziedly burning it all up with an insatiable hungry roar, so that the fire spitted, popped and crackled. There was something completely magnetizing about watching the flames whipping over the wood. When you're out in nature, there's nothing quite like it. I was feeling rather sick from overdoing it on the s'mores. I think my eyes were way too big for my stomach. I never seemed to rein in my impulses. My grandmother once described me as like a wild stallion, thundering off through the meadows at breakneck speed, and not looking where I'm going. She said that even if I was charging towards a viper's nest, I'd probably remain completely oblivious of it until I found myself ensnared in a problem that I'd failed to anticipate. She was probably right about that. My prudent brother had told me that eating 8 s'mores at once was going to give me a bellyache, and he wasn't wrong. I was feeling ever so slightly sick, but admitting to my brother Caleb that he was right would have almost certainly resulted in that condescending told-you-so look that he so often gave me. Why is it that I felt like the younger brother in our family? Caleb was so much more judicious than I was, so much more mature in every regard. My grandfather was puffing his pipe happily. I studied him curiously, as if I was looking at him through the eyes of a stranger. He was an interesting-looking man who had wispy white hair, although on his crown a pink island erupted through his hair that my grandmother unkindly called his bald patch, which she was always teasing him about. My grandfather had a long thin beard that you could braid into a long plait. I knew about this as I did it for him once. When he went into town, everybody hooted with laughter, asking him why his beard looked so terribly funny. But my grandfather never minded being laughed at. He was the kind of person quick to laugh at himself. You could tell my Gramps had been an outdoor man all his life, for his skin treacherously revealed his age, betraying his hard work spent under the Georgia sun, tending lovingly to his crops. His skin spared him no mercy, as far as lines, creases and sunspots were concerned. But even in his old advancing age, he was the kind of man you'd want to stop in the street to talk to. He looked interesting, like someone who had something that was worth saying, almost as if his entire face was a library of books that you'd enjoy reading or listening to. I noticed wherever he went, people would naturally gravitate towards him, young and old alike, and stop to have a chinwag with him. "How are you, Clayton?" they would say, and my grandfather would talk to them for a long while. Their faces would light up like a Christmas tree. They'd always walk away giggling. My grandfather had that kind of effect on people he met, and when we went to the local diner in town for a meal, he was never kept waiting for a table. Even if the tables were occupied, somehow a table was always brought out for him. "So what kind of story do you want me to tell you?" he asked us. "Do you want a true story or a fictitious story?" "True," I said. "I don't mind," said my brother. "As long as it's a good story, then I'm game for anything." "Well, in that case, I've got an excellent story for you tonight. One I think might actually blow your minds. It certainly did mine, and I think you're old enough to hear it. I hasten to say it's true. I witnessed it myself. In truth, it's one of those most enigmatic, most extraordinary things that I suppose ever happened in my life. I bet it's happened to other people. I think they might wonder if they imagined it. It's amazing when you see something idiosyncratic that doesn't conform to your own interpretation of reality. I think one might be inclined to persuade oneself that one was dreaming. In this case, I certainly was not." My grandfather's story. Growing up, my friend Wallace Carter had ambitious plans for his life, but not in the way you might think. When I was at school with him, he was always the dreamer, the boy in class gazing out of the window, looking at the congregation of black squawking crows nesting in the old gnarled oak tree, his mind 1,000 miles away from the classroom. I remember his grades were always poor, not because he was stupid, but because he didn't pay any attention in class. It was like school and everything it represented bored him silly. When he got bad grades, he didn't give a toss, nor did he bat an eyelid. It was like water off a duck's back to him. Didn't bother him in the slightest. I can't remember the amount of times the teacher would say to him, "Wallace Carter, what did I say? Kindly repeat what I've just said, will you?" "Sorry, ma'am," he'd say. "I can't remember." "Wallace, you go and stand in the corner of the classroom right now. How many times do I have to tell you to pay attention? Your head is always in the clouds, and I think if you listened, you could do well in class. Now go and stand in the corner at once." This was obviously done to humiliate him, but for Wallace, he just grinned and happily went to stand in the corner. Wallace was a dreamer, but he was also lazy. He wanted a good life for himself. "I'm going to be rich when I'm older," he told me. "I'm going to be a millionaire, buying anything I could ever want for myself." Wallace did very badly in school, was lazy on his father's farm. In truth, it was hard to believe he really would make anything of his life, given he really didn't want to lift a finger. I remember going fishing with him on numerous occasions, and when the fish at the end of the line got too much of a challenge for him, as it was tugging too much, Wallace would actually get me to wind the fish in. That was the extent of his laziness. I mean, who does that, unless they're really struggling? But Wallace did not want to be bothered. He didn't like challenges of any kind. The one thing he had going for him was charm, and Wallace had oodles of it, and a great sense of humour. So even though he was lazy by nature, I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with him, and we became the very best of friends. One day when me and Wallace were in our mid-20s, a young woman moved into our town. She bought the most expensive farmhouse from a wealthy farmer, and dressed like she bought all her clothes from the finest fashion designers. Everything about her exuded wealth, and it was rumoured she was sitting on a vast fortune. She opened up the local florist in town. When Wallace heard about the young woman's vast fortune, he was exceedingly excited. Even before he met the woman, he told me he was going to marry her on account of her affluence. I was exceedingly cynical in regards to the matter. I mean, he hadn't even met the woman yet. What about love? Did that not come into the equation? "I don't care about that kind of stuff. Even if the woman's ugly, I'll still marry her. Don't you see, Clayton," he said to me, "this is my meal ticket, my quintessential opportunity to enjoy the benefits of a carefree life. Not worrying about bills, expenses, going on fabulous holidays, driving nice cars, not having to worry about a dicky bird. What's there not to like about that?" Naturally, I told him that marrying someone based on their wealth and not due to a mutual attraction, respect and friendship was nonsensical. "Why not? Women have been doing it for centuries. A pretty girl seduces a rich man. She's set up for life. A lot of young pretty women do it all the time. It's no different for me." I knew there was no arguing with Wallace. The man was exceedingly stubborn, and trying to persuade him that his way of thinking was seriously warped was like throwing eggs at a brick wall and expecting the wall to give way to your opinion. It wasn't ever going to happen. Wallace had made his mind up. Of course, I had my reservations that he would pull this stunt off, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Rumours soon circulated around our town that Wallace was dating this very wealthy woman, who was sitting on this vast fortune. This woman was smitten over Wallace. Wallace had her eating out of his hands and hanging on to his every word. She seemed so sweet, unassuming, and not an unattractive woman. I think she was about 5'6", medium slim build, brown hair with blonde and gold highlights, dark brown eyes, and a golden honey bronze complexion. Her name was Jennifer Cassidy. Of course, it was easy to look good with her kind of wealth, as her hair and nails were professionally done. She always wore very stylish, expensive clothes. When Wallace told me that Jennifer had agreed to marry him, I asked him, "Do you love her, bro?" Which he replied, "Of course not." "But I do love her money, and that's why we're getting married." "Does she know you don't love her?" I asked him. "Of course not.
I tell her that she's the most beautiful woman in the world, that I love her madly, and that I couldn't imagine living without her. And then she's the one that said, well, why don't we get married?
I tried to discourage Wallace from this rash, impulsive decision of his, but he was a bull in a china shop, champing at the bit to get married. He told me he'd managed to persuade Jennifer to an agreement that if they were married for 7 years and then got divorced, that Wallace would be entitled to half of her fortune, but they had to be married for 7 years first. Wallace thought that that would be a doddle. After the 7 years was up,
I can get a divorce then. I'll be set up for life, with half of her fortune. I'll never have to work a day in my life.
I remember the marriage in town was a huge affair, with no expense spared. The couple went on an exotic honeymoon location together. But when Wallace returned from his honeymoon, he was not the Wallace I knew and loved. I could see my friend was incredibly miserable. It was like he wanted to tell me something about his marriage, but he just couldn't get the words out. He did admit to me that he was very, very miserable. He felt trapped, and that Jennifer Cassidy was not what she seemed to be on the surface, but he seemed reluctant to get specific. I could see that my friend seemed terrified of his wife. His hesitancy to go home at the end of the day was very pronounced. I remember saying to him,
"Look, Wallace, if you're so unhappy in your marriage, forget the 7-year agreement. It's not going to work. You can't live like this. Just get divorced. I'm sure 7 years of misery is not worth a huge payout at the end of the day. Just ask for a divorce and be done with it." "But you don't understand," he said to me. "My wife is not human. If she gets her sharp claws into me, I'm in trouble, big trouble. That woman could kill me without stopping to draw breath. To tell you the truth, she scares the hell out of me, Claydon. She'll kill me if I leave. I've already asked her for a divorce. Don't think I haven't gone there already. She nearly bit my head off, quite literally. I don't mind admitting she frightened the hell out of me. That woman is dangerous. She's not human." So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.